Hello everyone, my name is Pavel and welcome to my speech for Rolling Scott School presentation task. Today we'll consider such a topic like OAuth. Some people consider OAuth a login flow, like when signing into an application with Google login. And some people think that OAuth is some mystery secure thing that just works. And they don't really know much more than that. So, OAuth or Open Authorization is an open standard for token-based authentication and authorization on the Internet. This standard allows notifying a resource provider such as Facebook or Google or Twitter and so on that the resource owner, that is you, grants permission to a third-party application. They grant to the third-party application access to information of a resource owner. For example, a list of friends, photos, videos, mail profile information, and so on. It is not an API or a service. It is an open standard for authorization and any developer can implement it. So, OAuth allows an end-user account information to be used by third-party services without exposing user credentials. It's commonly used as a way for Internet users to grant access to the information of other websites or applications but without giving them a password. It is convenient because there is no need to create a new account on a website or app. And at the same time, the application is not privy to user credentials. OAuth is a standard that is complementary to and distinct from OpenID, which is designed for authentication. It just carved two words, authentication and authorization. You should differ one from the second. Okay, who is who? Authentication is a process of user validation, whether application say that guy is that guy. It is when you validate user identity, like asking for a username or password on login. Whereas authorization is when check to see what permissions an existing user already has. Just remember that OAuth is a protocol for authorization, not a single sign-on. This is a high-level term which used for describing a scenario in which the user uses the same credentials to access multiple domains. Let's consider the general scheme of application that uses OAuth. Usually, OAuth provides to clients a secure delegated access to several resources on behalf of a resource's owner. It specifies a process for resource owners to authorize third-party access to their server resources without sharing credentials. OAuth acts as on behalf of the end user, providing the service with an access token that authorizes specific account information to be shared. The process of obtaining such a token is called a flow. You can ask me how to begin to use this standard. I want to build my application right now. Just wait a second. Before you can begin the OAuth process, you must first register or create a new application with a service. For example, we'll give you Facebook. When you register a new app, you usually register basic information such as application name, website, logo, and so on. And in addition, you must add a redirect URI to be used for redirecting user to a web server or browser-based or mobile apps. After registering your app, you'll receive a client ID and a client secret. The client ID is considered public information and is used for built login URLs or included in JavaScript source code. The client secret must be kept confidential. You should remember. If your deployed app cannot keep the secret confidential, such as single-page JavaScript apps or mobile app, then the secret is not used. You should bear in mind that if you can keep the secret, you shouldn't use it. Just use the different scenario for your app. There are four separate models of OAuth which are called grant types or flows. They are authorization code flow, implicit flow, password credential flow, and client credential flow. Each flow serves a different purpose and is used in a different way, depending on what type of service or application you are building. You might need to use one or more of these grant types to make stuff work. Let's go over each one separately. The first one is authorization code flow, or a grant type, which means to be used on a web servers. You want to use the authorization code grant type if you're building a web application with a server-side code that is not public. If you want to implement an OAuth flow in a server-side web framework such as Express.js, Flask, Django, Ruby on Rails, an authorization code is the way to go. Here how it works. A user visits your website. They want to log in your site or application using a third-party identity stored somewhere else. Over here as a server. They click a login button on your application and they are redirected to their identity provider. And they are prompted to accept certain permissions. If they accept these permissions, the identity provider will redirect user back to your application with the authorization code. Your server will make a new request to the identity provider API with the authorization code you just given, and you'll be given an access token you can use to make a real API calls for retrieve the user information. So, how to use the authorization code grant type? You basically create a login button on your login page with a link. When the user clicks this button, they visit identity provider where they will be prompted for whatever permissions you requested. After accepting the permissions, the user will be redirected back to your website or application at whichever URL you specify in redirect URI parameter, along with the authorization code. You'll read the code from a query string value and exchange that for an access token using the provider's API. You should remember that the given client ID and client secret stuff were given from Facebook app we just created. So don't forget it. Once that post request has successfully completed, you receive an access token in which you can make a real API call to retrieve the user information from the identity provider. The next scenario is implicit flow, which is used for authorization of fully client apps. The implicit grant type is meant to be used for a client-side web application that don't have a server-side component, or any sort of mobile application or native desktop application that can be used their own browser. Implicit grants are ideal for client-side web applications and mobile apps because this grant type doesn't require you to store any secret key information at all. That means that you can log someone else into your site or app without knowing what your application client secret is. What differences between the previous grant type? It differs from the previous method by getting access token immediately after user agreement without sending additional requests. But you should bear in mind that it can be used only for requests which will send directly from user devices. For example, calls from JavaScript on a website or a mobile application. So the scheme of this grant type looks like this. Is simpler, it's much more simpler than the previous one. You are clicking the button with a link which invokes a login dialog and accepts certain permissions. If a user accepts these permissions, the identity provider will redirect you back to your website or application with an access token, not authorization code, access token. And you can use immediately this access token for making API calls. How to use this grant type? Here it is. You're creating a button with a given link, but you should remember that this example we are inputting response type token, which means that we're using implicit flow. When the user clicks this button, they'll be prompted for whatever permissions you requested, and after accepting the permission, we're redirected back to application at whichever URL will specify to redirect URI parameter along with the access token. And if you are not pointed past redirect URI to other parameters, you'll be redirected to a blank page with an access token. For example, if you are using a native mobile or desktop apps. That if you are developing this type of application, you shouldn't point redirect URI, and you just pass into your native browser and take the access token from parameter. So, a password credential flow. This means you just enter username, password, nothing else. It is meant to be used for first-class web or mobile applications, and it is ideal for official web or mobile apps of your project, because you can simplify the authorization workflow by only asking the user for their username or password, as opposite by redirecting them to your website. That just means that you have built your own OAuth service and they created your OAuth client application. You could use this grant type for authenticate users to your native Android or iPhone or web apps. But here's the catch: only your native web or mobile application can use this method. Let's say you're Google. It will be okay for you to use this method to authenticate users in the official Google Android or iPhone apps, but not okay for some other sites that uses Google login to authenticate people. The reason here is, by using the password credential grant type, you'll essentially be collecting a username and password from your user directly. If you allow the third-party vendor to do this, you run the risk that they will store this information and use it for bad purposes. Nasty. So, how to use the password credential grant type? You basically create a form or sort of login page that accepts the user credentials, typically username and password. You'll accept the user credentials and post them directly for a service user the request format with a URL to resource provider and inputting query string with a login and password, or a body with a post request, it doesn't matter. And the last one is client credential flow. It's meant to be used for application code. If you want to use this the client credential grant type, if you're building an application that needs to perform non-user related tasks. For instance, you might want to update your application metadata, written application metrics, for example, how many users have logged into your service or sent a notification, etc. What it means is that if you're building an application like a background process that doesn't interact with the user in a web browser, that's the grant type for you. Here how it works. Your application makes a request to identity provider with the following parameters and receives the access token back. You'll fire off a single API request to identity provider that looks something like this. If you're receiving access token and you make real API calls. We are considered four main scenarios for using OAuth, or flows or grant types, whatever. You should know what grant type to use. Now, here are some cases. If you are building a server-side web app, you should use authorization code flow. If you are building a fully client-side web application or mobile desktop app, use implicit flow. If you want to integrate your application with your own OAuth service you built yourself, use password credentials. And if your application doesn't interact with user data, use client credentials. You should ask me when to use OAuth. Well, you should only use OAuth if you actually need it. If you're building a service where you need to use user privilege data which is stored on another system, use OAuth. If not, you might want to rethink your approach. There are other forms of authentication for both website and API services that don't require as much complexity, and they can be offer similar levels of protection in certain cases, namely HTTP basic authentication, HTTP digest authorization. Okay, let's think it over. OAuth is a simple standard of authorization based on the basic principles of the internet, which makes it possible to use authorization on almost any platform. The standard has support of larger sites, and it is obvious that its popularity will only grow. We pointed the main aspects you should know about OAuth, and thanks for your attention. I hope we'll see you soon.